Excerpts from Physics Division Field Manual 13, Special Circumstances, Humanoid Threat Entities. Type Red, Regenerator. Introduction. A regenerator, type Red, is an overarching designation for any individual who possesses the ability to reconstitute damaged tissue and limbs. Contrary to popular belief, a type Red is not indestructible. Numerous methods exist for disabling the regenerative ability of a type Red or liquidating the type Red despite their abilities. In some cases, type Reds will self-terminate through uncontrolled use of their abilities. However, most cases will require intervention by an operative. Forms. Flawed regeneration. This type of type Red is a low threat and can usually be engaged by a single operative. When injured, instead of replicating the lost tissue, the type Red's body will instead fill the gap with a material unsuited for the area. For example, if a flawed regenerator experiences the loss of an arm, there is a chance it will be replaced with a large growth formed from tooth enamel. This form of type Red will typically kill itself via accumulated minor injuries if left alone. Limited regeneration. This form of type Red possesses the ability to slowly reconstitute lost tissue and in some cases limbs. Limited regenerators can prove dangerous in combat situations, as permanent injury is difficult to maintain. See techniques for more information on how to permanently liquidate them. Full regeneration. This form of type Red possesses the ability to regenerate lost tissue and limbs in a matter of seconds, making liquidation or permanent injury impossible. See techniques for information on how to incapacitate this form of type Red. Expanding regeneration. To date, 7 type Reds of this form have been discovered and incapacitated. Engagement by anything less than a response level 5 effort comprising multiple strike teams is not recommended. Expanding regenerators possess not only the ability to regenerate lost tissue and limbs, but also generate further limbs and organs, often drastically increasing in size during the process. This combination makes expanding regenerators formidable opponents. Further information on how to incapacitate this form of type Red can be found in techniques. Reincarnation. Type Reds of this form are highly elusive and dangerous, as they cannot be liquidated in a traditional sense. No known threat entities of this form are confirmed, though many entities have spuriously claimed to be reincarnators. Several forms of potential threat entities are monitored by the Coalition, but determining whether or not a PTE is a reincarnator could theoretically take multiple lifetimes of observation. Sources. A. Consumer. Most type Reds still require raw material and energy to reconstitute lost mass and tissue. This means a very high metabolism, and that means a lot of food. In these cases, it may be valuable to monitor their patterns of movement and identify their sources of material and nutrition. This will allow a strike team to better select a location to stage an ambush from. B. Converter. A few type Reds are capable of converting inorganic matter into material their body can use to regenerate. These entities are far more versatile than ordinary consumers and can sustain themselves in most environments. Depending on the materials they consume and how they convert them, they may be more durable than ordinary type Reds. C. Conjurer. Exceedingly few type Reds of this variety exist. Those that do are highly dangerous because they can generate the necessary matter and energy to reconstitute themselves without needing to feed and they cannot be exhausted. Identification. Initial identification of type reds usually takes place when an observer reports a person suffering an injury that heals unusually quickly. An assessment or strike team will then engage the target, move them to a secure location, immobilize them, and administer a Sharps test. A small incision is made to the subject's palm, and the rate and nature of the rapid healing assessed. Capture. Type reds are difficult to liquidate in the field. Operatives will often have to capture the subject before transferring them to another location for a final liquidation. Injury to the legs is effective against limited regenerators and some full regenerators. Alternatively, multiple and repeated injuries to the body will often incapacitate some full regenerators, while their body repairs the injuries. A knife, stake, or other sharp object can be forcibly embedded into the brain. Although the type red will attempt to regenerate brain and skull matter, the sharp object will prevent full regeneration. Recommended point of insertion is the base of the skull, through the brainstem and upper spinal cord. In the case of expanding regenerators, liberal application of fire is recommended. This may make it difficult to capture or transport the still burning subject. Techniques. Incineration. The type red is placed into a mobile incineration trailer, which is then primed and ignited. Depending on the level of regenerative abilities, multiple applications of fire may be required. In extreme cases, incineration may be required in perpetua. Submersion. The type red is placed in a sealed container, which is then completely filled or immersed in water. This will cause the type red to drown, regenerate brain functions, and subsequently drown again, rendering the type red effectively incapacitated. An alternative to this method replaces the water with earth, concrete, molten metal, or another solid. Corrosion. Similar to submersion, but replaces the water with high molar acid. Erosion. The subject is reduced to multiple smaller pieces by cutting or abrasion. In some cases, this can be effective on its own. In other cases, erosion may be used to enhance the effectiveness of one of the other liquidation methods. Poisoning. Cold iron is capable of inducing rapid metal poisoning, and the manner in which it does so can liquidate many type reds, as it will prevent cellular regeneration and will deprive the host's vital organs, including the brain, of oxygen. A single bullet is enough to kill most subjects, given time. Complete destruction. A regenerator cannot regenerate from injury if they have nothing to regenerate from. Should a type red survive all other attempts to eliminate it, GOC High Command may give the order to deploy a small nuclear payload with the goal to destroy the subject. Destruction must occur completely on a cellular level at a speed that the subject cannot regenerate at. Even if the subject survives the blast itself, it is predicted that the radiological damage to the DNA will essentially render the subject a large mass of tumors. Note: extreme cases may require the use of multiple methods in rapid succession. Excerpts from Physics Division Field Manual 13. Special Circumstances, Humanoid Threat Entities. Type Yellow, Polymorph. Introduction. Polymorphs, type yellows, sometimes called shape changers or shapeshifters by operatives in the field, are entities that possess an inherent ability to manipulate or otherwise alter their physical form and appearance. Despite several defined types of type yellows existing, they have proven difficult in the past for even inexperienced assessment teams to identify and difficult for strike teams to pursue, given their amorphous nature. Most type yellows retain intelligence through their polymorphing, and type yellows that do not retain intelligence through polymorphing are incredibly rare. Methods in which to identify and liquidate type yellows are found below. Classifications. Conditional polymorphs. Type yellows classified as conditional polymorphs do not have control over their polymorphic abilities. Rather, their polymorphism it is triggered through a sequence of events or when certain conditions are met. Conditional polymorphs appear with significant frequency in folklore and mythology. Examples of this include, but are not limited to, a kiss transforming an animal into a human transforming into a wolf transforming into a human, or either turning human-wolf hybrid upon a full moon or contact with wolfsbane. Seals who are able to take a human form for 1 day a year by taking off a layer of skin. Basic observations are required to determine if a type yellow is a conditional polymorph rather than an unconditional or modeled polymorph. Unconditional polymorphs are type yellows classified as unconditional polymorphs are nearly identical to conditional polymorphs, but are able to transform from one form to another freely. Unconditional polymorphs are often far more trained in the application of their abilities than conditional polymorphs. Most unconditional polymorphs still only possess one form apart from their humanoid state. Some unconditional polymorphs have a degree of control in their transformation, in the form of using their transformation abilities, wherein their bodies take on elements of their other form. However, much like conditional polymorphs, very few unconditional polymorphs can intentionally induce partial transformation of the body, so any changes achieved through hybridization are largely uniform. Modeled polymorphs are type yellows classified as modeled polymorphs gain their name due to the unique pattern of their abilities. While a conditional polymorph cannot take the form it takes, a modeled polymorph is both able to transform at will and possess multiple forms that it can take. In a few cases, modeled polymorphs have been observed to hybridize multiple forms together, though this is thought to be an exceedingly rare ability amongst modeled polymorphs. Modeled polymorphs can typically acquire additional forms, though this process may require strenuous and continuous practice and may take weeks, months, or years, depending on the strength of their abilities, the deviancy of the form they wish to attain as compared to their base form, and their level of experience. This process may also require additional resources, such as bones, blood, or skin belonging to the form they wish to emulate, or specific ritual proceedings. Modeled polymorphs may possess forms selected for specific circumstances and situations, often either to defend themselves or to escape capture, while the predominant majority of modeled polymorphs take the shapes of other animals, most often a similar mass to themselves. Several have been observed to use their abilities to take the shape of other humans and humanoids. This poses a massive potential for misuse, but is exceedingly difficult to detect. Controlled polymorphs are type yellows classified as controlled polymorphs have the highest degree of control over their abilities to manipulate and alter their physical forms, though they still operate with limitations. Controlled polymorphs can transfer mass from any part of their body, excluding vital organs, and either transform it to other parts of their body or create new parts, usually extremities, from that mass. In combat, controlled polymorphs usually utilize this ability to grant themselves additional limbs for the purposes of attacking and defending at close range, or additional organs to increase their chances at survival. Through rigorous testing on behalf of several assessment teams, it was discovered that most controlled polymorphs can safely generate up to 200% to 500% of their body mass to construct extra organs, limbs, and bones. Despite this, a controlled polymorph cannot immediately recreate or regenerate any parts of their body as they were before they were damaged or destroyed, similar in a way to a flawed regenerator. It must be noted that while these controlled polymorphs may display many similar traits to regenerative anomalies, they achieve these effects through their abilities as a polymorph, and therefore will not emit the same etheric resonance as a type red threat entity. Of note, controlled polymorphs are not known for achieving the same precision in transformation into animals or other humans when compared to a conditional polymorph or modeled polymorph can achieve. And this may be due to the fact that controlled polymorphs are fully responsible for the conscious control of their shape, while conditional polymorphs either lack conscious control of their form, and modeled polymorphs rely on rituals or practice to stabilize their shapes. True polymorphs. Perhaps the most rare variety of polymorph that the GOC has discovered. For a type yellow to be considered a true polymorph, it must meet the following criteria: the lack of a base form to return to, the non-reliance on vital organs such as the heart or brain for life and consciousness, the ability to transform into any animal shape or human shape, regardless of differences in mass with minimal effort, and rarely, the ability to transform into non-organic materials such as stone, metal, mist, or fire. Ptolemy researchers have long suspected a link between polymorphs and the nameless, of which true polymorphs are likely the least dilute in this relation. These theories have not been verified. Atypical and complex polymorphs. While the coalition tends towards broad categories and trends, in truth, type yellows are one of the most diverse categories of threat entity, and a significant amount of them will not cleanly map to any category. In most cases, these polymorphs are atypical, still operating within the boundaries of their type. In other cases, a polymorph will display abilities more in line with another threat type entirely. These type yellows are considered complex polymorphs. Perhaps the most common example of this would be a contagious variety of lycanthropy, which spread by saliva or injuries that break the skin, and would accordingly be considered type yellow-silver by the coalition. In a few rare cases, the GOC has encountered regenerative polymorphs who possess a level of regeneration that maps to a full or expanding regenerator, and who emit the according etheric resonance, and thus qualify as yellow-red. Perhaps the rarest variety that can still be considered common are threat entities who gain polymorphic capabilities after dying and reanimating, earning them the ignoble threat profile of yellow-gray. Commonly mistaken, there are several other humanoid threat entities that can easily achieve the same shape-changing ability of a type yellow through other means. One example of this would be known threat entity 1208 Green Beerus, a type green who was known to use its reality-altering abilities to achieve a form of imperfect polymorphism. The current whereabouts of known threat entity 1208 are currently unknown after the threat entity was abducted by the Foundation, KTO, CUPE, in 2008. Other threat entities that are commonly mistaken for being polymorphs include type blue, thaumaturgus, type cyan, specters and apparitions, and most commonly, type pink, human hybrids. Identification and methods. Identifying a threat entity as a type yellow usually starts with local accounts, especially in areas known to have local folklore involving shape-changing entities. Once a specialist assessment team, example given, assessment team Proteus, is sent out to investigate that area, they will set up a 24/7 observation area of 5 to 25 square miles, depending on the size of the area in which the type yellow was spotted. The assessment team must inspect the local population while maintaining the second mission, concealment, goals. Determining a type yellow in a population may require establishing a list of suspects and covertly installing Veritas resonance imaging technology to screen for potential threat entities. While the Veritas system is capable of detecting the particular resonance signature of a type yellow, it does have limited range and may not lend reliable results when used on a type yellow who is not presently in the process of changing their shape. If Veritas technology is required to find a type yellow, it is recommended to be used in several spots, usually 6, around the observation area, so the full area can be mapped and searched over for type yellows. If the amount of possible suspects is very low, or only one, those suspects or a single suspect should be given small visible injuries such as cuts, and once a transformed type yellow is spotted, if the injury remains in the type yellow's polymorphed form, it can be safely assumed that the type yellow is from the pool of suspects. When deceased, most type yellow will revert to their natural forms, after which a DNA sample can safely be taken and tested to confirm the identity of the threat entity. Threat levels. Forward. Despite what you may think about the importance of this section, it is a necessary addition. These ideas of threat levels are general, though they do apply to a majority of real cases. Conditional polymorphs have been proven to be simpler to identify than other type yellows, as under constant observation, the conditions met for conditional polymorphs to transform can be deducted easily, especially while Veritas resonance imaging technology is in use. How to proceed after discovering a type yellow among a population is described in engagement and capture. Conditional polymorphs in human form and anyone within a population being observed are considered response level 1 by default, though if a type yellow has been identified, they are to be considered response level 2. However, a type yellow's response level, once identified, can vary from a response level 1 to 4, depending on the danger of their polymorphed forms. Identifying controlled polymorphs hostile to the GOC and or humanoids are to be considered response level 3 upon an order to engage given by the overseer currently overseeing the observation area the type yellow is within. If the overseer in the overseeing an observation area currently housing a controlled or modeled polymorph does not give the order to engage the type yellow, it is to be considered response level 2 and captured immediately when most convenient. All atypical and complex polymorphs are to be considered response level 4, especially when information on them is limited. Engagement and capture. Though most conditional polymorphs and modeled polymorphs can be incapacitated and even liquidated rather easily due to their predictable and recorded forms, usually through the use of standard firearms and ordnance, controlled polymorphs are sometimes on par in threat level with an expanding regenerator, and true or complex polymorphs frequently exceed the capabilities of typical polymorphic entities. Dedicated yellow teams, such as the Hand of Tyr, are automatically assigned towards missions dealing with high-threat polymorphs, but any strike team may be assigned to engage polymorphs of lower threat class, though they may be requisitioned as field support by a yellow team in the case of an escalation. Despite the danger they present on the field, there are several dozen methods to engage with and potentially capture type yellow threat entities. Conditional polymorphs. If the conditions of a conditional polymorph transformation are known, they may be able to be prevented from occurring. If the conditions are impossible to prevent or prevention efforts fail, the overseer overlooking the observation area the type yellow is within gives the order to change the response level of that type yellow, and actions proceed from there based on the set response level. In engagement with dangerous conditional forms, where the prevention of conditions has failed, it is crucial to, if looking to capture, peacefully incapacitate, or, if looking to liquidate, kill the conditional polymorph hastily and without delay. Incapacitation is possible using conventional sedatives in the vast majority of cases. Unconditional polymorphs. It is essential to target an unconditional polymorph for capture or liquidation in such a manner that they do not have to react, as if given a chance to change shape, capture and liquidation become much harder. If the polymorph remains in a form that cannot be damaged, it may be prudent to retreat while monitoring the subject until the subject believes they are no longer in any danger, but still isolated. Once these conditions are achieved, the attempt at capture or liquidation may be resumed. Modeled polymorphs. If the observation area set up to monitor a modeled polymorph has functioned correctly, the assessment team assigned to the area will be able to provide an idea of each of the modeled polymorph's forms, so it is advised to ask for this or provide this to your team before engaging a modeled polymorph. If the order has been given not to liquidate a modeled polymorph, it is recommended to attempt to restrain it to prevent escape or further transformation. This is possible through the PolyNet, Gen 1 Plus technology, an adaptive net that will adapt its size and shape to restrain any form inside it without being breached from the inside. Controlled polymorphs. Docile and fully identified controlled polymorphs are to be considered response level 3, unless an order that is given by an overseer says otherwise, and the overseer's order takes priority. If the order is given to kill a docile controlled polymorph, liquidation is to be done covertly and quickly, preferably through the use of a gray suit, along with the use of a sniper rifle or automatic firearms to accomplish both of those goals. Given the nature of controlled polymorphs, it is necessary to have a backup force concealed nearby in the case of a failure to quickly liquidate the controlled polymorph. If the order is given to capture the docile controlled polymorph, a covert strike team equipped with gray suits and tranquilizing ammunition is to be established in a designated area, while members from an assessment team deceive the controlled polymorph into following them to the strike team's designated area. From here, the strike team is to fire their tranquilizing ammunition at the controlled polymorph until it is incapacitated. The controlled polymorph is to be brought from the designated area to a nearby observation post and briefed about the GOC there, told not to engage with the local population. If the controlled polymorph does not comply, it is to be liquidated within the observation post. The observation area is to be partially demobilized, with some staff moved out of the observation area, though it is to stay partially manned and operated. Hostile or non-compliant controlled polymorphs are to be considered response level 4 unless an order that is given by an overseer says otherwise, and the overseer's order takes priority. If the order is given to kill a hostile controlled polymorph, a covert strike team, all equipped with gray suits, is to be sent, preferably at night for the cover of dark, out to search for the hostile controlled polymorph. The team must be equipped with sniper rifles to ensure a quick kill, and explosives are recommended to quickly kill and possibly fully destroy the controlled polymorph. Depending on the threat posed by a controlled polymorph's forms, white suits, and rarely orange suits, are likely to be approved by the overseer overlooking the liquidation of a hostile controlled polymorph, as long as the second mission, concealment goals, can reasonably be upheld. If a controlled polymorph previously considered hostile is found to be docile or even friendly, the same procedure as with a docile controlled polymorph is to be followed with further armed guards stationed in the room containing the controlled polymorph. True polymorphs. True polymorphs are never docile. They always warrant response level 4. If the order is given to kill a true polymorph, a strike team equipped with white suits and Mark III MPHDCA multipurpose ammunition, the predecessor round to the GOC's Black Bullet, composed of a silver jacket and a black osmium core with incendiary components, is to be sent to search for the true polymorph and engage it. This team is typically equipped with general-purpose machine gun weaponry, explosive ordnance, and ranged incendiary equipment to increase the chances of a kill. Sustained fire may be necessary to cause any meaningful damage. Esoteric vulnerabilities. A prevalent element in folklore and mythology surrounding polymorphic entities is the vulnerability to certain materials or substances. The list below notes the efficacy of several materials and methods that have been historically used to combat polymorphic entities. Destruction of the head or heart, 99%. Exposure to extreme heat or extreme cold, 95%. Exposure to cold iron, 88%. Exposure to standard kinetic trauma, 86%. Exposure to silver, 55%. Exposure to metallic elements that do not occur in nature, such as technetium, 18%. Exposure to other non-silver coinage metals, such as copper or gold, 17%. Exposure to non-silver precious metals, such as palladium and platinum, 8%. Exposure to the bones, blood, or skin of the animal or person therefore mimics, 2%. Exposure to wolfsbane, acnodium, if the subject's transformation is not already triggered by it, 1%. Excerpts from Physics Division Field Manual 13, Special Circumstances, Humanoid Threat Entities. Type Green, Reality Bender. Introduction. Reality benders, type greens, have a certain mystique among GOC operatives. Some operatives even argue that it is impossible to terminate a type green, and it is suicide to even try. The kill record of our organization says otherwise. The key to terminating type green entities lies in finding and taking advantage of their few weaknesses. In 95% of cases, greens cannot predict the future and can be taken down by surprise. Greens have limited range and cannot affect what they cannot perceive. Greens cannot impose their will on anything if they have no will to impose. And greens have human foibles and can be manipulated emotionally and or rationally. Sequence. 99% of type greens undergo the following sequence of psychological changes as their powers progress. Phase 1. Denial. The subject refuses to acknowledge their ability to warp reality. The type green will attempt to rationalize away their abilities by various means. In some cases, the type green will end here. Their ability will be self-suppressed and they will not proceed. However, most then proceed to Phase 2, experimentation. The subject acknowledges their abilities and begins to test the limits of their powers. In general, type greens tend to experiment in one of two patterns: slowly, methodically, and carefully, advancing a small amount at a time or in a small number of sudden jumps. In any case, the subject will generally remain in this mode for some time before proceeding to Phase 3, stability. The subject reaches the limit of their powers and determines the boundaries of their abilities. The type green achieves control over their reality shifts and can manipulate them as necessary. More importantly, they can choose not to utilize their abilities if needed. Phase 3 is usually characterized by attempts to live a normal life. The subject will continue in normal routines and, aside from necessary precautions to prevent losing control, will utilize their abilities only in private and only in a manner that will not harm others. These type greens may be classified as Threat Level 1, Monitor, Do Not Engaged, but should be monitored closely due to the risk of proceeding to Phase 4. Phase 4, the Child God. Sadly, the majority of type greens will eventually progress to Phase 4. During this phase, the reality bender becomes obsessed with the power it possesses and will attempt to utilize it for personal gain at the cost of others. This phase is marked by reduced empathy for other humans, inability to accept personal faults, and increased megalomania. Although warning signs are numerous, the key aspect of a Phase 4 is the use of their abilities to manipulate other humans. Teenage and young adult type greens will typically use their abilities for sexual purposes, while children will attempt to make strangers their friends. Older adults may attempt to manipulate others for love or financial gain. Although a few cases have resulted where the type green then reverts to Phase 3, 99% of them will remain at Phase 4 until eliminated. For this reason, Phase 4 type greens should be considered Threat Level 5, immediate threat, and eliminated immediately, as they represent a major threat to all aspects of the fivefold mission. Termination. Any attempt to eliminate a type green must take into consideration the three factors for dynamic entry in close quarter battle. Speed. Type greens are able to react quickly to any threat. In order to ensure a successful kill, the operation must take no longer than 1 second from initiation of hostilities to termination of subject. This is the average time it takes for the human being to reflexively react to an unexpected threat or event. Surprise. Type greens are able to quickly adapt to known threats. It is recommended that a bluff play be carried out. An overt threat is to be presented to the subject for them to fixate upon, while the actual kill is carried out from an unexpected direction. Violence of action. The kill method chosen to eliminate a type green must ensure a successful termination on the first shot. Sniper weapons should utilize large caliber rounds, preferably hollow point, for maximum expansion, or armor piercing as needed. Firearms are, of course, a secondary kill choice. Explosives are recommended, but may not be usable due to collateral damage risks. If firearms must be used, multiple shooters should be present, and all should aim for headshots if possible, or center torso shots if necessary. Example: names have been redacted for security purposes. Subject Alpha, Alice, was a 90-year-old Caucasian woman living on a farmhouse in Town A, Anytown, USA. Alice first came to the attention of the GOC following reports of ghosts haunting the fields outside her town. Initial covert investigation was able to rule out the presence of actual spectral entities through Veritas scanning. Further investigation was approved. A GOC special observer, Oscar, proceeded to Anytown with a full support team, posing as the cast and crew of the reality television program Ghost Finders, Inc. Subject Alice was discovered to be living alone with 2 cats. She had been widowed 3 years prior, and her children all lived out of state. Subject Alice proved personable and charming, and often engaged the operatives in conversation and provided them with tea and home-baked cookies. Oscar soon determined over the course of the next few days that Alice was the proximal cause of the apparitions, as they only appeared when Alice was either asleep or not present. Upon engaging her in further conversation, he discovered that she was a lapsed Catholic, now agnostic, who expressed a desire to believe in an afterlife, but was not satisfied by her faith. Agent Oscar theorized that Alice was a subconscious type green who was expressing her grief over her husband's death by manifesting apparitions of his ghost. Following a lengthy philosophical discussion, including a discussion of Pascal's wager, the apparitions increased in strength and clarity, allowing Oscar to obtain a clear photograph of the entity. He then presented the subject to Alice for identification. To his surprise, Alice identified the photograph not as her husband, but as Subject B, Bob, a young man with whom she had been acquainted during her younger years. Alice claimed that she and Bob had been romantically involved in the early 1940s, but their relationship had been suspended when Bob was drafted into the Second World War. During that war, Alice made the acquaintance of her eventual husband, a factory worker who had been classified 4F due to a leg injury caused by an automobile accident. 2 days after Bob received her Dear John letter, he was killed in Normandy during Operation Overlord. Alice's heightened emotional state caused the apparitions to increase in frequency and intensity, including physical manifestations. After a GOC operative was injured by a Luger bullet fired by one of the ghosts, central order termination of the subject, Operative Oscar requested permission to attempt a non-lethal soft kill, citing second mission concealment concerns. Permission was granted. No record remains of Operative Oscar's subsequent conversation with Subject Alice, but it convinced the subject to manifest an apparition of Bob that night, the first time that she had manifested an apparition in her own presence. After receiving emotional closure with what she believed was the spectral entity of her old lover, the apparitions ceased manifesting entirely. Subject died 3 nights later in her sleep of natural causes. No further paranormal phenomena have occurred in the area since Subject Alice's death. Operative Oscar was commended for his actions. Excerpts from Physics Division Field Manual 13, Special Circumstances, Humanoid Threat Entities. Type Blue, Thaumatologists. Introduction. Thaumatologists, Type Blue, have numerous names, including witches, wizards, sorcerers, magicians, miracle workers, and occultists. It doesn't matter what they are called because they all inherently do the same thing. Utilize thaumaturgy, which, as many of you may know, is colloquially known as magic. For this very reason, type blues have two characteristics that make them one of the most difficult threats to deal with. One is their difficulty to be identified. Even with the most advanced techniques and technology, type blues are often mistaken for other threat entities, especially type greens. In fact, it isn't uncommon for threat entities to be both a type blue and another type, such as a yellow or a cyan, as thaumaturgy is a common starting point for many capabilities. The other is their versatility. Most types tend to follow a basic pattern of behavior or methodology, which makes them easy to deal with. Blues' behavior entirely depends on several factors, since thaumaturgy itself has so many different practices, techniques, and effects. Usually, blues will specialize in specific genres of thaumaturgy, such as elemental manipulation, special temporal alteration, or metamorphosis. Though blues also tend to be experimental and inventive, and will often branch out of their common practices to learn new methods or create new ones. Even with these difficulties, there are means to deliberate, dampen, and liquidate type blues. Class. All type blues fall into one of three categories known as classes, though there have been cases where subjects have been classed as two or even all three other categories. However, most subjects will be classified as scholar, the most common type of blues and can be the hardest to deal with. Scholars are typically ordinary individuals who have acquired thaumatological capabilities through study and research. In most cases, the designation scholar is somewhat undeserved, with most scholars merely wishing to acquire power and skills quickly and without careful effort, resulting in them having poor understanding and control over their thaumatological capabilities and their effects. This makes these types of scholars rather easy to deal with. However, those who are of more academic or patient character can be more of a challenge. These kinds of scholars are careful with their development, rigorously researching and experimenting rather than rushing. Because of this, they are much more powerful and usually more creative with their capabilities. That isn't to say they aren't all difficult to deal with, as these individuals usually, if not too power-hungry or obsessive, are open to deliberation and discussion. The wielder. The most unusual of blues, but usually the easiest to deal with. Wielders' thaumatological capabilities do not actually come from the individual themselves, but rather from a bond they formed with another entity, usually a Gudric, Templum, Kapala, or Ex Machina threat entity. In a sense, wielders merely channel and output the capabilities of the bonded entity. Often, if the wielder is of weak constitution or character, they will inevitably end up submitting to the will of said entity. Gifted. The rarest of blues and the hardest to identify, gifted thaumatological capabilities are innate to their biology, often displaying abilities soon after birth or later in early childhood to late teenage years. This ingrained nature is why gifteds are so hard to identify, with a lot of them getting mistaken for other types of threat entities, usually greens. The exact nature of how a gifted form is not entirely known, though it has been suggested by ICSUT that certain genetic codes develop and mature to enact ritualistic proceedings. To put it in simpler terms, the genes are incantations. Performances. there are several ways to enact thaumaturgy, known as performances, with most subjects preferring one system over another. Each one has to be dealt with differently, with some being easier to counterattack than others. Leitmotif. Thaumaturgy is invoked through the use of speech, phrases, musical sequence, or other forms of auditory output. Mudra. Thaumaturgy is invoked through the use of gestures or movements, ranging from a slight movement of a limb to an entire dance performance. Runic. Thaumaturgy is invoked through the use of symbols, including numbers, letters, words, or sigils. Wish. Thaumaturgy is invoked through mental effort via emotions, memories, or fragments of knowledge. Ritual. Thaumaturgy is invoked using a multiple of the previously mentioned methods. Identification. As previously said, blues are rather difficult to identify. However, there are a few signs that can help to both localize and identify them. All thaumaturgy requires a concentration of Eve or Akiva radiation flux to function, with blues naturally causing a point of focus in this flux. Blues cannot help doing this because as soon as they begin utilizing thaumaturgy, they become attractive to thaumaturgical influence. This focus in the flux can be detected through the use of an etheric resonance imagery, ERI, like the Veritas. However, this method is not foolproof. Should the environment already be high in flux, blues of insubstantial capabilities and strength will not make a prominent focus. Therefore, the use of ERIs is useful for localizing blues, but more in-depth investigation is required to actually triangulate the individual. In the case of scholars and wielder, subjects can typically be found in locations or areas of historical, cultural, religious, or educational value. The renowned extra-dimensional location known as the Wanderer's Library is one of these locations, with many blues using the location to expand their capabilities and influence. They also are likely to have established or attempted to establish relations with already known parathreats and organizations, such as the Serpent's Hand and Marshall, Carter, and Dark Limited. Vulnerabilities. There are a few ways of dealing with all classes of blues, but in some cases, assessment and strike teams must undertake precise measures for different classes. Iron and silver. As had been known for millennia, iron and silver have the unusual property of redirecting and negating thaumaturgical effects, making them perfect for conflict with any blue. If such materials are unavailable, compounds made up of either metals, such as steel, sterling, or electrum, can be effective, though not nearly as effective as their pure forms. Cold iron is the standard material used to combat blues, so strike teams will often utilize ice bear traps to subdue objects or ochre bullets if termination is required. In the cases where the subject requires at least response level 4, strike teams are permitted to use malachite bullets. Mark V Hopeless Elderwood Iron Ammunition malachite bullets, composed of a bronze jacket and alderwood iron core. Counter saturation. Eve and Akiva radiation is a very responsive force, and just like a metal to a magnet, will gravitate to the most attractive, powerful subject. In most cases, whilst they are a threat, most blues will be relatively weak or inexperienced. Therefore, should two blues come to face one another, the flux will tend to gravitate to whichever subject holds the most powerful capabilities. Locomotion. In some cases, blues maintain strength so long as they remain in proximity of a location, So forcing the subject to move location can have beneficial results. Not only is this because it forces subjects to reassess their resources and surroundings, distracting them from performing, but it can also cause a shock to their system if the flux they have gotten used to is no longer present. This technique is also effective if the transition is from a rural environment to a more urban one. Urban environments tend to possess higher levels of pollutants or erratic flux, heavily weakening and sometimes killing blues that are not more versed in such environments. Separation. This technique is usually exclusive to wielder class subjects, specifically if they employ a Capella or Goodrick type entity. Since a bond needs to be maintained for the subject to be able to possess their capabilities, separating the subject from their source will halt this. This can be done by actually physically forcing the two entities to separate, or if the threat possesses its own will, incept a doubt or offer to force the threat or subject to abandon their partner. Sensory occlusion. By inhibiting a subject's ability to locate resources and enact their performance, this will render them vulnerable and easier to detain. A simple straitjacket and gag will be able to prevent most motif and mudra performers from enacting any thaumaturgy. This method, whilst quick and easy, isn't always effective, especially against wish performers who don't rely on sensory input. Threat levels and termination. In the majority of cases, blues are identified early in their development and usually, depending on their behavior, performance, and class, will be assigned response level 1, minimal threat. Should the subject's development continue, two options can be undertaken. Option 1, the ICSUT's rehousing scheme can be employed, and the subject will be transported to the nearest free port, such as 3 Portlands or High Brazil, and required to sign a Geish gag order. This option is often taken by gifted class blues. Option 2 typically occurs if the subject becomes abusive, power-hungry, and uncooperative. Then the subjects will be upgraded to response level 2, submoderate threat. At this point, assessment and strike teams are deployed, equipped with bronze suits and ice bear traps, and at least one certified operative capable of thaumaturgy to act as a sink. Termination of the subject can be avoided even at this level, however. If the subject's resources become spare, they lose the ability to enact their style of performance, or in the case of wielders, their bond with their entity is severed. Then they can be detained for later liquidation or assessment. If the subject's behavior and capabilities continue to grow more erratic, they are to be further upgraded to response level 3, moderate threat, and termination must be undertaken. At this point, the use of ochre or malachite bullets is suggested. Type Gray, Post-Mortem Reanimation. Overview. There are over 100 known instances of parathreats that operate by animating the corpses of the dead, ranging from simple prions to complex nanomachines. New ones are discovered on a regular basis, as diverse as the situations in which they are encountered. For this reason, coalition operatives should familiarize themselves with the following 3-step mnemonic, also known as the SEX method, for secure, evaluate, and exterminate, for dealing with Type Gray outbreaks. Secure. The first priority in any Type Gray outbreak is to secure the area in which the outbreak is taking place. The following tasks should be carried out in order of priority, most vital to least important. Individual situations will, of course, require revision of this general order. Establish worst-case scenario fallback plan. Coordinate with security assets. RE authorized response level. Lock down infested area and establish a secure perimeter. No persons are to be allowed in or out of this perimeter. Security personnel are to be informed to shoot on site. Should GOC personnel be unavailable, local law enforcement or military assets may be commandeered under a standard cover story. Establish a headquarters within the infested zone. Said headquarters should be secure and preferably non-adjacent to civilian defense points so that compromise of civilian defenses will not threaten GOC assets. Locate and make contact with any remaining civilians. Do not attempt to move civilians to headquarters zone. Any civilians surviving within the infested area are to be left in place. Evaluate. Because of the large number of Type Gray threat entities, it is imperative to establish the nature of the Type Gray outbreak. GOC personnel are to liaise with any medical or scientific personnel within the infested zone and make first-hand observations of infested threat entities. Analyze collected data and refer to GOC Type Gray database. If a Type Gray is determined to be a known threat entity, refer to sterilization manual for the particular KTE. Should data be insufficient, or if the para-threat is determined to be an unknown threat entity, then the following information should be recorded. Note: due to multiple breaches of quarantine, GOC personnel are no longer to attempt a capture of a live specimen of either infested persons or the Type Gray threat entity until the infestation is pacified. All Type Gray threat entities under observation and study are to be destroyed immediately upon determination of an effective kill method. Nature of physical and mental changes in the infested personnel. All Type Gray entities work by animating deceased matter. However, the amount of physical and or mental faculties remaining after infestation vary between threat entities. Initial observation of infested individuals should establish 3 facts: remaining physical capacity, speed of movement, agility, and strength. Remaining mental capacity, ability to solve problems, collate data, sensory capacity. Social characteristics, remaining pre-death personality or memories, presence of hive mind or internal factions. In most cases, Type Gray entities cause a 50% or more loss of physical capacity and reduction of mental capacity to simple hunger. Hive minds and internal factionalisms have been recorded in less than 10% of cases. In most scenarios, a Type Gray infested human is slow, mindless, and violent. Many Type Gray threat entities are non-transmissible. Infestation must take place directly towards dead flesh. However, many others can be transmitted through bodily fluids, through localized energy life forms, or through magical or religious means. Until said means of transmission are determined, all GOC personnel are to utilize Class 1 isolation gear. Note: following the outbreak of the mimetic cognitohazard Type Gray threat entity, KTE 5321, Blick Gray, Eye Blight, all Class 1 isolation gear have been revised to include visual distortion lenses. In addition, the GOC team on site are to determine whether the threat entity is transmissible to humans only, or should the entity be able to infest animal or plant life, which forms of life are vulnerable to infestation. Effective kill method. In past experience, the following kill methods have proven effective in Type Gray outbreaks. Immolation, 99.9%. Destruction of brain, 72%. Bodily trauma, 54%. Toxins, 3%. Other, 2%. Assessment of effective kill method, EKM, should be carried out in the following manner. Locate a single Type Gray infested human and establish a kill zone. Test subject is to be secured if necessary to ensure sharpshooter accuracy. Establish perimeter, including fallback plan and fire support. Sharpshooter armed with scoped rifle, including underslung launcher, fires 2 rounds into center of mass. Assess results. If method is effective, cease testing. Sharpshooter delivers headshot. Assess result. If method is effective, cease testing. Sharpshooter loads and fires incendiary grenade. Assess result. If method is effective, cease testing. Sharpshooter loads and fires chemical grenade loaded with Zombie Gun toxin cocktail. Assess result. If method is effective, cease testing. If standard kill methods prove ineffective, withdraw to headquarters and contact GOC High Command for further instructions. Exterminate. Following establishment of security and determination for an effective kill method, GOC strike personnel are to sweep the infested area according to standard clean and sweep protocol. Personnel are to report back every 2 minutes with status update. Should 25% of sweeping personnel be lost, mission is to be aborted, GOC personnel withdrawn, and response level 3 assets deployed to incinerate infested zone. Should losses exceed 50% at any point during withdrawal, remaining personnel are to be considered expended and immediate response level 3 operations carried out.